Okay, I think we can start. Thank you everybody to join our webinar today. Um, I remind you that we are going to record this webinar and you can watch it later in our SCAR portal. And I'll give you a very quick introduction about SCAR and the geoscience group. And then I leave the floor to Sharon for the ANTOS webinar. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, maybe most of you knows what SCAR is, the Scientific Committee for Antarctic Research. But I just give you a very quick overview for those who don't know it. SCAR is a thematic organization of the International Science Council and initiated very long time ago. First meeting was in 1958. And since then, SCAR has been the main body for coordinating Antarctic science internationally and the Southern Ocean. And basically, the role of SCAR is to coordinate, connect, to discuss, to create the opportunity for the community to meet and discuss about main topics, main scientific challenge to address together, and has also a role in the sense that is advising, is a scientific consulting body for the Antarctic Treaty and other organizations like the IPCC for protecting the Antarctic and the Southern Ocean environment and managing the Antarctic and Southern Ocean science. How it works as a committee, as a president. And the picture in the bottom right shows the present day SCAR Executive Committee with the President Gary Wilson, the one in the middle with the red jacket. Maybe I can use the pointer. Okay, this is Gary Wilson from New Zealand. He was elected by the delegates in the last SCAR meeting, and he will be in charge for 4 years. And then there are several vice presidents from different countries. They're also elected by the SCAR delegates. And then the executive director, Chandrika, and the EOGAN and the rest of the secretariat who are advise and help the committee in preparing all the documents. The SCAR is organized in geoscience, life science, and physical science group. And within each of these groups, there are different expert and action groups. The geoscience group in particular has several action groups and like ANTMAP, ANTPAS, ANTVOLC, e.g. GeoCon, Giant, IPSCO, and ICEPRO. And we had webinars on each of them well, basically they address specific different topics like ADMAP is about mapping magnetic anomalies, ANTPAS is about permafrost, ANTVOLC is volcanism in Antarctica, GeoCon is the conservation of geosites, Giant is about gravity and geodesy, IPSCO is International Bathymetry for chart and International Bathymetry of Southern Ocean chart. ICEPRO is an action group dealing with proxy and paleoproxy calibration. Today we will hear about the ANTOS group. ANTOS is actually an action group which is cross-disciplinary because it's supported not only by geoscience but also by the life science group. And so we will hear about what they do and what's their target, how they work, and people who is involved from Sharon Robinson later on. The leading officer of the geoscience group are Jesus Galindo Zaldivar from Granada, from Spain, Naresh Pant from India, myself as a secretariat from Italy, and Giulia Matilde Ferrante, who is a young fellowship supporting the three of us, also from Italy. That's a picture of the four of us in Chile, in Punta Arenas, for the last International Symposium for Antarctic Earth Science. And here is the code to subscribe the Geoscience mailing list, where you can get news about what we do and opportunities. This is the list of the webinars. So some of them have been already shown, but you can still watch them because the video are recorded and they are in the SCAR portal. Today we will hear about ANTOS on October 1st, and then the next meeting will be Giant on October 7th, and the others. So if you go to the website, you can scan this code and register for the webinars, and you receive the link to connect via Zoom. Okay, that was very quick, but it's just a very briefly overview. But in any case, if you have any question, you can always write us, and yeah, we are available for any question. So now, Sharon, if you want to show your presentation.
Can you see that now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. I'm Sharon Robinson. I'm a professor at the University of Wollongong, and my co-presenter this evening I'm in Australia, so it is evening for me. But my co-presenter this evening is Dr. Crystal Randall, who's a postdoctoral fellow in my laboratory here at the University of Wollongong. And we're both part of Securing Antarctica's Environmental Future, which is an ARC research initiative that in Australia that's looking to ensure that we use the best physical sciences, geosciences, to inform how biodiversity is being affected in Antarctica, and then come up with the best mechanisms that we can for conservation planning. And ANTOS is really linked to these objectives because what ANTOS stands for is Antarctic Nearshore and Terrestrial Observing System. And the idea of ANTOS is that we should have a coordinated and consistent way of monitoring biodiversity around the continent and understanding how biodiversity is changing in relation to how the environment changes. So it's a continent-wide, biologically focused initiative assessing the responses to that environmental variability and change that we all know is happening. And the change, why do we need ANTOS? If we're going to understand the change that's happening to biodiversity in Antarctica, we have to be able to orientate that with respect to place and time. And it's long been known that long-term ecological studies contribute to placing current conditions into the context with the past, placing those current changes in context with other locations. So we might have a long-term monitoring study somewhere in Antarctica, but if we only have one, we don't know whether that's something that's really important across the whole continent or even within a region. If we have long-term ecological studies that are coordinated, we will be able to better understand the present and that will help us to develop frameworks for predicting how the future of species and ecosystems in Antarctica will be. And so long-term ecological studies have been found to have a really big impact on policy, much more than short-term studies do. They're also cited by scientists and published more often in high-ranked journals. So they also provide greater bang for your dollars or your currency. And they're the backbone behind evidence-based decision-making. So if we want to know how to protect the biodiversity of Antarctica, we do have to know how it's changing and then we can use models of what the future climate might be to predict how that biodiversity is going to fare in the future. So that's the basic idea behind ANTOS. And ANTOS, an Antarctic Nearshore and Terrestrial Observing System, could have many, many benefits. So the value add for ANTOS and the catalytic outcomes that could come from it are shown here. So for data and environmental managers, it gives us real-time data to inform environmental protection. For data managers and scientists, it gives us the ability to track extreme events and their impacts. For researchers, it enables them to work together in a coordinated network around Antarctica for the greater good. It would mean that Antarctic ecosystems are monitored remotely and in real time. And that's much more efficient because I like to show the example of whenever there seems to be an extreme event in Antarctica, hardly anyone is ever there to study the biodiversity at the time that that's happening. We're always sitting back at home wishing somebody was down in Antarctica or we had some way of measuring these things. The Antarctic Treaty would ensure that we have open access to data. It would be useful for the ATCM and the CEP, the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meetings and the Committee for Environmental Protection, because we would have agreed a priority for tracking environmental impacts and the implications of climate change. So we already know that long-term monitoring informs IPCC reports and various unit reports, and also within different countries, state of the environment reporting. So for all of these reasons, it's really important in the research, the Antarctic research space, and for SCAR and for all the national Antarctic programs. But in addition, if we had an ANTOS system, we'd also be able to bring Antarctica into our universities and allow researchers who don't currently work in Antarctica access to that data. We could bring Antarctica into schools and have real-time data for school students to use. And we could bring Antarctica into museums, science spaces, art galleries, and public spaces and enable visualizations of Antarctica for public use and an increased opportunity for artists to work with Antarctic data. And all of these things will increase awareness of Antarctica and what's happening in there, and also hopefully increase people's interest in helping to ensure that Antarctica is protected. And also these things would increase STEM literacy and help students and citizen scientists to problem solve with real data. So there are many, many catalytic outcomes that could come from a truly comprehensive ANTOS system around Antarctica. So ANTOS was really set up to come up with a consistent way of setting up a system of monitoring towers around Antarctica, which would collect data and send data back in real time to a standard database and then allow that to be accessed around the world. It was the founding chairs for ANTOS were Craig Carey and Vonda Cummings, and they've been instrumental in developing ANTOS over the years. But last year in 2024, following the untimely death of Craig Carey, two new co-chairs were appointed, and I'm one of those, and the other one is Ian Hogg. And we have had some successes in terms of planning and developing and installing ANTOS monitoring sites. So Australia, New Zealand, Belgium, and Canada are involved in looking at ANTOS platforms or installing ANTOS platforms in Antarctica. So some of these programs have bought and installed platforms in Antarctica, like New Zealand. Australia is planning to do that. Belgium is also planning to do that in the next year. And Canada is using similar systems in the Arctic. And we're also really involved with the development of new technology, and Crystal might talk a little bit about that at the end. New technology that will help us to understand the microclimates that the Antarctic biodiversity is working at. We're starting to have discussions with the chairs of the Committee for Environmental Protection's Environmental Monitoring Intersessional Group about how CEP could create and help to create monitoring sites across the Antarctic biogeographic areas. And I'll show you those on the map in a minute in case you're not familiar with them. I'm going to talk a bit about two papers. One that's reviewed past long-term monitoring of Antarctica, and that really illustrates the gaps that we have and why we need to actually make sure that this happens all around Antarctica. And a second paper that is the results of a survey that ANTOS, or two surveys that ANTOS has conducted to look for potential future monitoring sites. So the first paper is already published and the second one has been submitted. And from these, we produced two draft papers for the ATCM, which ended up not being tabled for this year's meeting, but we're hoping we'll go to next year's meeting about these two topics and showing where we might put platforms for long-term monitoring of biodiversity, and also highlighting the bias towards certain areas and certain species, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail. So I won't go through this whole list, but this is just to show you that we do have quite a lot of people on the expert group panel. So we have Ian Hogg and myself as co-chairs. Magumu is our secretary, and we have colleagues from Korea and New Zealand and the US and the UK, Argentina, Italy, France, Australia, Malaysia, Spain, Belgium. And we're very happy to have new interested people join the expert group. So if anyone at the end of my talk, or if they're watching this online, thinks they'd like to be involved with ANTOS, please get in touch with myself or Ian or Magumu. So this is just to illustrate one of the national programs that is investing in ANTOS. So the Australian Antarctic Division has purchased a number of ANTOS platforms and plans to install one of these at Casey in the next, hopefully in the next year or so. And this is a picture of a Casey moss bed, which will hopefully be the place where we'll be monitoring, put them near to where we would put the tower. And I'll see if this video works, but this is some work of Crystal's. So this is actually developing new technologies. So we're also interested in having smaller platforms that are away from the main towers that collect data at really fine microclimate levels, which is the level at which the biodiversity is actually operating.
SCAR, вы же сами пересылали вчера.
Can you please
Is everything
put
okay?
Okay, thank you.
And so this video basically is one of two videos that Crystal installed this summer at Casey, and this is showing that moss bed with the snow melting out through the summer, and just having this visualization of when the snow melts and when the moss is wet and able to photosynthesize is really important for biologists to understand how Antarctic biodiversity copes through the long winters and then manages to grow through the very, very, very short summers. So the idea of ANTOS is to have a network around Antarctica that would all be collecting data that's comparable, and that would be then housed in the database in Korea, in South Korea. So this is some of the work that we've been doing with these microclimate platforms. So this is Johan Bethelemy, and he's been looking at AI solutions to ensure that we collect the data that we need, that's packaged up and sent back to us in Australia. But we don't have to send all the data. It's collected on the site, but it's not necessarily streamed all the time. And this is to overcome those problems that we might have with the time that the batteries can be charged through the summer, and also the times when we actually want to collect data and making sure that the data that's provided is valuable and that is the information we need. And so we're collecting temperature at different depths and getting imagery at the same time, and relative humidity and water availability and things like that at these sites. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the two papers that the ANTOS group has been working on. And so the first of these was the result of these two surveys that ANTOS has conducted over the last few years. And this was to look at where current monitoring occurred around Antarctica in the first survey, and then in the second survey to try and really understand where monitoring, where people might be able to put, where would be good sites to put ANTOS towers. And so this map is of the Antarctic conservation biogeographical regions, which are all coloured here around the coast in different colours with their names. And these are the ACBRs that were designated by Terrestrial and Lee in 2016. And the shaded areas around the coast are, in light blue, are proposed marine protected areas, and the current protected marine areas in green. And you can see from the size of these dots how long monitoring has occurred. So there's a few places, well, one area of the whole of Antarctica where we've got long-term monitoring that goes back more than 50 years. There's a few spots around on the peninsula and around the perimeter of Antarctica where we've got monitoring that's been going on for 20 to 50 years. And then a few more where we've got data from 11 to 20 years. And then there's a few that are very under 10 years in duration, and a few more of those. But you can see even from this map that there are many areas around Antarctica that are not covered by this. But this is to give you an idea of the length of time that people have actually been monitoring nearshore and terrestrial ecosystems around Antarctica. And there's surprisingly few studies that actually will have a long reach in terms of long-term monitoring of biodiversity alongside environmental variables. So what we did within ANTOS was to come up with a decision-making framework for how we might decide where would be good sites to put ANTOS towers. And I won't go through the whole decision-making tree that's shown here, but I'm happy to share these slides with people if they would like them. And also the references are, one's published, the other paper's published, but this one is also available as a preprint. So in terms of how we decide where ANTOS towers should be, where we do this monitoring, the most important thing is that there's places where we expect there to be environmental change that's affecting the biodiversity, and places that have high ecological significance. So the number one thing is that it's a highly ecologically significant site. And the second one is preference to sites where we expect environmental change to be happening and therefore want to monitor that for that reason. And then the third one, which is a feasibility criteria, is to make sure that we're setting these up in places where we would be able to monitor them for a long period of time, and that they won't just be one set of data and then nothing happens. So from this, we came up with a second survey, and we honed in on a number of sites where we thought there really could be could be ANTOS towers, and they'd be very useful in these sites. So in the first line in this table, you've got places where we know there's rapid change happening and where we know there would be good sites for ANTOS towers. And the ACBR is the region, the Antarctic Conservation Biogeographical region that they're within. And if it's got a fish, it's a marine site. If it's got a plant, it's a plant vegetation site. And if it's got both, it would have both a terrestrial and a nearshore system. And the second column in the middle is ones where and the first column, we have existing infrastructure. We have advocates who would be supportive of these ANTOS towers. So these are very high feasibility as well as important sites to monitor. And then we have advocates for these other ones in the middle column. And then we have a set, the column on the right-hand side is the ones that the ACBRs that are not represented currently. So places where we think we should really have ANTOS towers happening, but at the moment we don't have, we have no supporters of these sites for monitoring because there hasn't been any long-term monitoring at these sites to date. But we feel that they're really important in terms of ensuring that we have a consistent approach to biodiversity monitoring. So the second paper that we've been involved with was just recently published in Global Change Biology. And this one lays out the key benefits of long-term monitoring of ecosystems. So we know that if we want to document responses to environmental change, we want to answer key ecological questions. They help us to evaluate the efficiency of efficacy of management interventions. They enable us to do biodiversity risk and vulnerability assessments. They lead to increased impact and engagement through citizen science, which can inform policy and management. And then they allow us to document the natural variability. So these are all values of long-term ecological monitoring. In this paper, we looked at how many papers have been published, and this is in English predominantly, but how many papers had been published in the peer-reviewed literature that described long-term monitoring of either an Antarctic nearshore marine or terrestrial biota. And our criteria for long-term was that somewhere had been studied at least 3 times. We didn't specify it had to be 10 years or 5 years. We just said it had to be a series of 3 biological studies over different seasons. And they didn't have to be a uniform gap between them either. So they might be 3 studies in 3 years, or there might be 3 studies over 50 years. We actually found a surprisingly low number of monitoring studies. So there's only 136 long-term monitoring studies that were published before 2025 that came up in this in our search. And more than 60% of those were conducted in the Antarctic Peninsula region. So if you think back to that first figure that I showed from Abigail Borgemeyer's paper, that's not probably surprising. It's also not surprising given that the Antarctic Peninsula is easier to get to and there are more stations. More than half of this periods of monitoring were longer than 10 years, which was a good outcome. So we were actually pleasantly surprised that we had more than half that went on for more than 10 years. The groups studied were very, very biased. So 65% of the studies involved marine birds or mammals. So the charismatic megafauna really wins out. Only 17% studied nearshore marine organisms other than marine birds or mammals. Only 15% studied terrestrial vegetation or terrestrial invertebrates. There were 5 studies on nearshore marine fish, only 1 study on fungi, and no studies for soil microbial communities. So these are long-term studies, not any study, but it's concerning that we have no studies that are looking at the microbiology, which is there's going to be more microbes in Antarctica than any other species, any other groups, but we don't have any studies on those. If we look at the variables measured, the most common biological parameters were abundance, which was over 52%. Breeding season, obviously, for animals and birds was 17% in 17% of the papers, and biodiversity aspects were considered in 9% of the papers. And another feature of the papers was that the methods between different studies varied, making comparisons between all of these studies quite difficult. And that's one of the key features of ANTOS, is that we want to have, we want to standardize the way that we monitor around Antarctica so that we can make comparisons across East and West Antarctica around the continent, not just have one study that shows a long-term trend in a particular species. But again, a positive thing was that 58% of these studies, which were actually studying the biology, utilized environmental variables, and the most commonly studied were the air temperature, the sea ice cover and extent, sea surface temperature, and disturbance. Like with Abigail's study from the survey results that we've done, this is the counts of the studies. So again, the largest number of studies have taken place on the just off the Antarctic Peninsula on the South Shetland Islands. There's many, many more studies on the Northwest Antarctic Peninsula generally. And again, the size of the dot here shows the number of studies. So this size is 20, this is more than 20, these ones are 20, and so on. So there's a few places where there's more than 20 studies, and obviously, and 43 on the South Shetland Islands. And you can see from this that there are several Antarctic conservation biogeographical regions that have not had studies conducted within them. And this is the details on the birds, the biota that was studied. So we had marine birds and mammals as the largest group with over 60% of the studies. And in fact, more than half of those were on penguins, which is probably not surprising, but it does show that there's a bias in the biota that's studied. Nearshore, so this includes penguins, marine birds, and seals, and then we have nearshore marine flora and fauna, including the animals and plants on the benthos, plankton, vegetation, algae, and so on, and fish and marine vegetation. And then we have terrestrial flora and fauna, where we have non-vascular, vascular, non-vascular vegetation, and terrestrial invertebrates, and fungi, the one study on fungi. And this is just to show that when we look at what was studied, abundance, or whether the how much of the animals or plants were there is the biggest thing that's studied. And the second biggest thing is whether the animals are breeding. And then we have biodiversity measures, descriptions of the biodiversity, and growth and diet and survival of organisms as the key factors that are studied. And things like behavior, distribution, physiology, competition are all quite understudied compared to that. So what we're advocating for is a comprehensive monitoring system for terrestrial and nearshore Antarctica, which would identify key threats and monitor ecosystem responses to known threats, allow complete representation of all ecosystems and communities, especially the microbes, facilitate collaborations and sharing of data across all the researchers working in Antarctica on an international scale, standardize sampling protocols to ensure data are compatible and comparable, monitoring environmental variables at scales relevant to biological communities. And the idea behind ANTOS is really to establish these sentinel sites to achieve continent-wide monitoring. And we would need these to be all around the continent. And Pete Convey is always giving me a hard time about this diagram, because one of the things it doesn't show is very many sites inland. And that's obviously another problem of ensuring that we have comprehensive data would be, and comprehensive sites would be to ensure that we did have inland sites along on non-attacks and inland and in snow and other groups. So what are our plans for the next year? We want to finalise SCAR papers for next year's ATCM once both papers are published. We'll continue discussions with the chairs of CEP, Environmental Monitoring Intersessional Group. We want to liaise with the SCAR community to bring together meteorological and biological researchers to maximise the effectiveness of the new weather stations being installed. And these are just the ones that we're aware of. So we know that Chile, the Czech Republic, Spain, Brazil, Argentina, and Norway have all been installing weather stations in recent years. And so we probably have a network of weather stations. If we actually had the biodiversity data collected alongside some of those weather stations, we would be going a long way to actually having a comprehensive system for monitoring Antarctic biodiversity. And to this end, we want to have an interdisciplinary workshop at the next SCAR Open Science meeting to bring the two communities together, the meteorologists and the biologists, to discuss a way forward for this long-term monitoring. And I'd welcome any comments that anyone has about how we might go about this and the best way to ensure that we know about all the weather stations that are in sites of interest for biology and biologists, because that's the key to ensuring that this is as comprehensive as possible. We're hoping that there'll be opportunities for us to operate within InSync and IPY, because having a comprehensive monitoring system would be a really great achievement for the next IPY, for example. And we are discussing at the moment what the ANTOS expert group should do in the longer term, because originally it was planned around a set of ANTOS towers at different tiers, which countries could buy into and researchers could install. But we feel that that is probably not going to work in terms of, it's obviously very financially prohibitive to achieve that for many countries. And so we're trying to come up with a solution that maybe will be less expensive in terms of capital, but may actually get optimize weather stations and so on that are already being put in place. And so one of these weather station systems would be, for example, the red latitudinal set of stations that the INASH, the Chilean Antarctic program, have installed down the spine of the north, down the spine of Antarctica, the Antarctic Peninsula, and down as far as Union Glacier. And this is the one at Punta Ramonia. And it's abundantly clear that we really do need to be able to understand this, how the biodiversity is changing, because we know from, this is a recent paper that's just come out in Nature, showing that we have emerging evidence of abrupt changes in the Antarctic environment. And when we were writing this paper, it was actually really hard to find examples of how the biota around the continent in the nearshore and terrestrial environments is changing because of this lack of long-term monitoring. And so at this time, when we know that rapid changes are already occurring and will occur in Antarctica, it's really important that we're able to monitor that, the change, how that's going to affect the biodiversity. And so that was all I wanted to say. And I just might ask Crystal if she wants to add anything about the work that she's been doing in the microclimate space, because that's a key area that we really need to consider. And the reason why just having a weather station at a research station is not enough, because we actually need to know what the climate is like around the biodiversity. Crystal, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd love to. Great talk, Sharon. Thank you. Yeah, so what I'm involved in with my research is looking at the microclimates, or the immediate conditions that life in Antarctica is exposed to. So, yeah, like what they actually feel on a day-to-day basis, and that's information that we typically can't get from meteorological stations, because like the meteorological towers are measuring these variables pretty high above the ground and typically not in areas where biology is. So a lot of the data from the weather stations in Antarctica really isn't biologically relevant. So some of the work that I'm involved in is developing new technology to measure those variables that are more biologically relevant in areas where there is biology. So it's really important for this technology to have there's a slide there. Thanks, Sharon. So here's an example of our first prototype. And it's, as you can see, it has a really small footprint. It's got a low impact. So it can go into areas that have really sensitive biodiversity. And all of the magic happens within the box, basically. So there's all these sensors that are collecting biologically relevant information. And all of that information is going into the box, basically, where all of those electronics are. And there is an AI processor inside the box that's analyzing that data in real time. And it's sending back data to us in real time that's important for us. So it's not sending back all of the raw data, because it takes a lot of energy to send that back, and power and connectivity in Antarctica is quite difficult. It's quite a challenge. So we're using AI to analyze that data for us in real time in the field, and then send us back things that are important for our research, but also like autonomous change detection and like alerts for anomalies. And an example of that would be like if a heat wave was to occur, which is something that we haven't managed to capture, but we've just a couple of times we've just left the field and then there's been a heat wave and we weren't able to actually measure that. And so this technology will do that for us if that was to occur again in the future. But if a heat wave was to occur, this system will give us an alert that there's been an anomaly, and then we can log in remotely and increase the frequency of data capture if we want to. So this technology is going to be really important for long-term monitoring in really sensitive sites. And we are linking this type of technology with the ANTOS project as well, because as Sharon said before, like the ANTOS project aims to have a network of these of towers, ANTOS towers across Antarctica, but these towers don't necessarily have a small footprint, and so they can't always put them into really sensitive areas. So to extend on what the ANTOS project aims to do, we can use this system with a really small footprint as sort of like child systems in the field. And then they'll talk to the ANTOS towers, and they share the same data pipeline. And so all of the data will be analyzed on site and then sent back to us in real time.
Thank you, Crystal. And I might stop sharing. And thanks everyone for listening. And I don't know if there are any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. It was very, very interesting. Lots of things. I didn't know about your activities, actually, not so well. So thank you for showing you. I don't know if there are questions from the audience. But anyway, I have a question while people is thinking. How about the deeper water. You are working on the near shore in the coastal regions, of course, because they are close to the stations. But there are some, the SOOS, the Southern Ocean Observatory System. They do have monitoring stations offshore. A few of them. For example, in the Ross Sea, I know that Stefano Schiaparelli is a member of the committee, so he knows very well the situation. But have you thought about, the future in the development phase of for ANTOS to enlarge this networking to the deeper water? Because, for example, we are all aware about the Southern Ocean warming and how the warm water masses are more and more entering the continental shelf and affecting the Antarctic water masses. So of course the biogenic component as well. So of course, monitoring what's happening on land and around the coast is really important, because we need to have such kind of sentinel, but perhaps also at the continental margin, which is where the ocean meets, the Antarctic water masses, could be also useful to have it as a transect, to actually see how the climate is propagating the impact from the lower latitude to the higher latitude. I know it's more expensive, it's more difficult, but we need to be ambitious and thinking about the IPY and the Antarctica in Sync concept, the way how all nations are coordinating. Perhaps you can talk to also the Ice Pro Action Group, because I don't know if you had chance to see their webinar, but it's recorded. It was given on July 16, so you can have a look to this video record. And perhaps for the Open Science Conference, the two groups can organize some sort of meetings and check if there is any common point where you can actually optimize your, resources. And because they also try to look at, how the present day environment looks like, and how we can use this information to understand the paleo proxies. And so they tend to have a common procedure for collecting data in transect. Anytime all ships, they have a sort of protocol so that the data can then be compared and also used year after year to check how the environment is changed. So there are some common points with your group. I can see them, so it would be good to discuss together.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think ANTOS was probably modeled on the idea that behind SEUS, in that SEUS has been an observing system for a long time. But as you say, there probably are gaps. And so I think ANTOS was established because we felt there wasn't anything happening on the land and in the nearshore environments. But as you say, it really it needs to be a transect, and that is something that we could all work together towards for InSync and IPY in terms of understanding what's happening in the whole region. I think is really important. But obviously we have to do that as cleverly as we can, because and use all the resources that we can use in terms of AI and automatic sensing mechanisms, because and sometimes we may be able to use satellite data. So there's all different ways that we can monitor those things. But I think it's really important that we work together on this, because there will be much more power in the data if it's consistent and we can compare across the continent, than if one country goes off and does this in one place and no one else, nothing else is happening, so that we have no idea of how broad it is. And I think that's one of the things that's come out of the papers, is that there's really good work happening in lots of places, but it's fragmented, and it's still very difficult to compare, because everyone does their own, has their own way of doing their measurements, and so you can't compare things. And so having some systematic structure for data collection and measurements is really important. And then the other thing I think that Crystal brought up is understanding at what level we need to, at what spatial resolution and temporal resolution we need to have the climate data. And I think that's something that's become increasingly clear in the last few years. And when you look at microclimate measurements, Antarctica is again underrepresented for, say, soil temperatures. I know ANTOS is doing work in that space, and so it's got better in recent years. But, you know, there's a number of these areas where globally we have quite a lot of data in different regions, and Antarctica is the one that stands out as understudied. And it's understandable because it's so remote and difficult and expensive to get to. But I think learning from those other programs across the world that have managed to do this in some remote areas would be really valuable as well. And I absolutely agree that if we can try to get groups together at the Open SCAR meeting to share physical data with biological data, it will just enhance what we're able to do in this space.
Yeah, I think now is the time to ask for rooms for meetings for the Open Science Conference. So maybe, yeah, we can start thinking about organizing maybe a meeting with, if not all of the action groups, at least those who share some of the common interest, and have a sort of brainstorming to see what's the gaps, what's the future direction, and will be good for a young scientist to know how they can actually be leading some of these questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I put in a proposal to try and get these groups together, but I would really welcome your the life sciences group's help in advertising that, so that we encourage as many people to come as possible, because I think one of the big problems is we tend to only know about what's happening in small areas, and so I'm sure there are studies, for example, in the review paper that we did. I'm sure there may be studies in languages other than English that we've missed, or there may be studies that people are aware of that are unpublished. So I suspect it doesn't necessarily represent the full extent of monitoring in Antarctica, but the only way we're going to achieve that is to get people together in the same room and discussing what they've done and sharing what they've done and sharing the data.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Any other question? I don't see anything in the chat.
Well,
Yes.
no question, but only to thank the presentation that was very, very clear and very interesting in order to combine the activity of geoscience, biological science, and physical science. This is a very good SCAR product to integrate all the data. Only this comment.
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving us an audience, because I think it's really valuable to have this opportunity to discuss with different groups and hopefully reach some, as you say, Laura, to reach some new scientists in different countries who might want to collaborate with us in this space. And as I said, we welcome new members. So if you are doing environmental monitoring and you're interested in combining with some biologists to get the biodiversity data, then please do reach out to us.
Yeah, that's also what I want to say. These webinars are also the way to reach out more people outside and to make aware that SCAR is open to everybody and is welcoming everybody. And it does, particularly during the Open Science conferences, but basically the action group works all year round. So it's just a matter to reach out the contact person and question and discuss a bit more. So go for.
Also to comment that most of the people look later the webinar in YouTube. Then most of the audience are later. Then
Yeah.
this is a good initiative.
Yeah, but it's good you're recording it, because that is one of the
Yes.
big problems, isn't it?
Yes.
Is you can never get the perfect time.
Yes,
Yeah,
this
of course.
is the problem of the perfect time that is good for a part of the world, bad for another part. But for that, YouTube is a very good solution. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Therefore, I thank you once again and all the participants. And I hope to see you again in October 7th for the Giant webinar at 8 p.m. UTC. So see you next time. Thank you again. Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
See
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks.